All right. Hello, this is Chaplain Mike. So I am actually, Chaplain and Pastor Mike. I'm actually going live on Faithia. So, I'm just inviting you guys in along for the ride. Uh, okay. Hello, Faithia community. Chaplain Mike here. So, I actually have both my Faithia affiliated site, Facebook site, actually connected. So you might see me reading off, different maybe comments or anything, questions that others may have. So I am doing a talk today, and we're continuing our series. For those who are on Faithia, we're continuing our series of gifts and callings. And so we're actually dealing with the book of Samuel this time, First Samuel. So for those who are being invited along for the ride today on my Faithia affiliated Faithia Facebook site, welcome to those who are there. Welcome to those who are on Faithia app. And we might go live today on the Faithia Facebook, but if not, as I always say, we're here to do what we do, and today we're continuing our series on gifts and callings. And so we're talking about really what is your gift, or identifying your gift. And I know if you've been following from the initial start of the gifts and callings topic, you might notice that I've talked about a variety of gifts that was identified in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, as well as Ephesians chapter 4. There's even listings in Romans. And so we talked about, kind of like briefly identified these different gifts and kind of how they function in the body of Christ. And so today we're actually going to get a little more integrated into the actual gifts and callings and the function thereof. So if you have questions or comments or anything, feel free to type it in there, and that will go the same for anyone who's watching on the Faithia affiliated Facebook page. So it's under training for pastors and marketplace ministers. And so for those who are on Faithia, my goal is to kind of get them affiliated with Faithia, since it is an affiliated site, and kind of how they can benefit from Faithia. And so we're going to be coming from the book of 1 Samuel, and it's chapter 3. And we're doing verses 10 through 14. 10 through 14. So I will go ahead and start reading, because we're going to actually identify. I usually take 3 topics. So we're going to actually identify our calling. We're going to, and that deals with our gift. Find out ways of how we can find our administration in those gifts. And then also identify the people that we're actually called to. And that could be currently, and that could be future wise as well. So I'll go ahead and get started from verse 10, and then I'll kind of explain, because it's kind of coming right in the middle of the story. It says, "Then the Lord came and stood there, calling as at the other times, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. And the Lord said to Samuel, See, I am about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears about it tingle." Oh, I'm reading NIV version, just in case you want to know. Verse 12. "At that time I will carry out against Eli everything I spoke against his family from beginning to end. For I told him that I would judge his family forever because of the sin he knew about. His sons blasphemed God, and he failed to restrain them. Therefore I swore to the house of Eli, the guilt of Eli's house will never be atoned for by sacrifice or offering. Okay, now, God's given, Samuel some heavy stuff, right? Some heavy stuff. And if you know anything about the Old Testament prophets, they seem to have a lot of negative things to say, but a lot of positive things as well. But it seemed like they had to address the negative first, because God's people, as much as God would deliver them and bless them, they would forget about God. They would turn and start doing things against God, and they would start pursuing a path that had nothing to do with God, or even bringing glory to God. Just completely forget about them, right? I mean, think about the children of Israel with Moses in the wilderness. They made a golden calf out of their spoils and said, this is the God who delivered us, right? Yeah, it makes no sense, but that's how it is. People, when they get blessed, sometimes in our day, they forget God, right? Let alone gifts and callings, or what these gifts and callings are for. They forget about God. And so this is just one of those examples of, God addressing sin. And, it sounds pretty rough, because it seems like he don't even have a form of atonement, right? He don't even have a way of getting this right. But anyway, you can read more about that story. My goal today is just to really help us to understand, our gifts and the importance of them. And so just to give you information on, the story before we came in at verse 10, it basically Samuel was hearing a voice, and he thought it was his mentor. He thought it was him. You could go read the whole chapter if you want. And he kept hearing this voice. He heard this voice multiple times. And then his mentor eventually said, maybe this is the Lord. You might need to go talk to him. I'm just paraphrasing. I'm breaking it down in regular English, right? But Samuel went and listened. And this time he was ready to hear from the Lord. And this is where we come in, where the Lord, came and stood there calling as the other time, Samuel, Samuel. So it all starts when we identify gifts and callings. It all starts with a call from God. It all starts there. And this is Samuel. He was identified as a prophet. So, this is what he was called to do. And he was, speaking on behalf of God. And he was actually the last judge of the children of Israel, or of Israel, before kings come in, the book of Kings and everything. But thing is that he identified his specific calling because it was given to him by God, and his mission in his calling. Because there's many people who were called prophets in the Old Testament, and then you have a couple like even Philip's daughters identified as prophetesses in the New Testament. But we see Abigail, who was also a prophet in the New Testament. We see the prophetic ministry still functioning in a different capacity, but in a similar capacity. But thing is that this was his identification, and these all were people were called to these different offices, as I mentioned, but they were not all called to the same people. They were not called to the same administration of gifting. They was not called to the same level of gifting. Rather it's the the miracles that Moses had in his ministry, Elijah had in his ministry. In verses Samuel really wasn't like functioning in miracle ministry like that. He was functioning, as the word of the Lord, and he had ability of authority, like as a priest and a prophet, was a judge, right? He was the last judge of Israel. So, we see that he had a different administration, because Moses did none of he didn't really enjoy his priestly duties, if you want to go there, because Moses was getting sick and tired of the children of Israel. He didn't have the patience for them, and which is actually the thing that got him in trouble with man and with God. So they also have different struggles, and that's going coincide with when we're called to different ministries. We have different challenges according to the gifting and the calling that God has called us. And so to identify it, some people are called to be prophets, right? Some people are called to be, missionaries. Some people are called to be pastoral. Some people are evangelists. Some people are just called to be leaders, have leadership ability, administrators. Some people are called to be teachers in any area. I mean, that could be in seminary, that could be in school, that could be in elementary school, that could be in university, that could be anywhere. Teachers, trainers, because that's basically what teachers are. They train, but they give you a lot of information and insight. But just to stay to the course, you might be called to any function, to have mercy, have a strong mercy, or have a high level of faith. There's always one particular function that your primary focus, your calling, but there's other gifts like the ones identified in 1 Corinthians that come along and empower you, that God uses those gifts to empower you to fulfill that specific calling. Even if you're hybrid ministry gifting, or hybrid ministry gifted, which means that you might have, for example, you had Samuel functioning as a priest, which would be representative in a lot of senses, like as a pastoral role, especially in the Old Testament. And then you would have the prophetic ministry, right? Peter was an apostle, New Testament Peter, apostle, and an elder in the church, right? Paul wasn't necessarily an elder like that. He flowed, he's more translocal. He just traveled around a lot more than Peter did. Peter was more kind of centralized, localized, Jerusalem, and all that area, there. So Paul, obviously, his ministry expanded far beyond that, even to reach all the Gentiles, right? So you and me, his ministry was impacting. If you're not of the Jewish, or you're not your heritage is not Jewish, your nationality, then yeah, you're the Gentiles, right? We are the Gentiles. So they all have different functions, and so you need to identify your calling. Now, how do we do that? Your passions is the first place that it starts. My passions, what I'm actually happy about doing when I serve others, what I actually do to actually serve others, that I feel like is a strong benefit to others, that motivates others, that empowers others, that encourages others, that brings healing to others, whether physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. What area of life, and this can be even right now, because sometimes the calling is not fully manifested when we know about, like his ministry, Samuel, he received the call, but he wasn't walking in it right then and there, right? There was a process. And Paul, when he was called, the apostle Paul in the New Testament, when he was called, and he was actually Saul at that time by name, he was called, and he actually took a process of time before he actually fulfilled being released in Acts chapter 13, with him and Barnabas being sent out to function as an apostle, being identified as an apostle. But he was called from day one, right? And this took years before he actually fully came to that manifestation. But there was something that he was doing, as well as Jesus was doing, and Samuel, before the full manifestation, that they had to do currently to get them there. Irregardless, you are who God called you to be from day one. But even where you are, it's your passions. It's the things that you actually are happy about in serving others, that connects you to serving others. You might be somebody who loves to care for people, and have a lot of patience, and you like to walk them through the processes of life, step by step, the processes of life. This might be something that you're passionate about, right? And this is more pastoral. But you also might be a person who's very good at putting things together, being very administrative, being organized, and being able to control multiple things and get them functioning with order, even if they started off out of order. This might be something that you might be, you might be a secretary, you might be an administrator, you might be an executive director or something. the title doesn't matter. The gifting functions through whatever avenue that we have, whatever God gives us. For example, I teach martial arts. I'm a martial arts master. If you haven't known, or if you haven't heard about that or seen me talk about it before, yeah, I've been doing martial arts over 30 years. But yes, I'm an ordained minister. A chaplain, pastor. I do a lot of things missional. Like a missionary, cross cultural. But I'll just give you an example in the martial arts, and this is not even a secular field per se. So I would see that I would be very patient with people, coaching them to be better, to learn the skill, to develop the skill, helping them through their mistakes, having the time and energy, making the time and energy to see that they develop properly, and then fixing things if they're wrong. And others who have come into the class from other schools or whatever, and if they had a school of thought that was incorrect, like, I want to learn martial arts so I could beat up people, or I want to continue my skills so I could just learn how to beat up people, versus learning how to defend yourself and learning the principles of, first off, self-control, right? I would have to school them, not scold, school them on how discipline was the most important aspect, and you start from there. So I would have to take them and temper them down so that they could get the concept of self-control, and then give the skill and development. And so this takes patience, because you got, with people, you got personalities, you got attitudes, you got ways of thoughts and everything. And so that's very pastoral, very pastoral. And even when they don't like your skill or like what you bring to them, because it's not what they're used to, and they think that they know better, right? You have the grace to let them make their own decisions in life, and not just prove to them how wrong they are, and how that attitude that they have to go and use that skill, in that attitude will actually get them thrown in jail. Something that a lot of people don't teach in the martial arts world when it comes to actually knowing about self-defense. They actually just teach the skill, but not the responsibility. And that's not everybody, but I'm just saying, this is an example of the pastoral and the counseling, right? The consoling. But they also know that I'm a Christian. I have no problem with sharing that. I don't make them walk that path, right? And so it's the same with you, wherever God has called you, wherever that field may be. If you have a field that you want to type in there, I can give you an example of that field. But wherever your field is, wherever God has called you, the gifts are identified in those fields. This is how we identify it, by our passions. Knowing our gift is by our passion. And yes, responsibility can increase over time, or it can decrease, or it can transition from one to another based on what God has designed us for, right? But at a point in time, I know for me, I was more in the field, which I am still, but it's more like now it's more of a supportive role and kind of like a managerial role to actually help others, to coach others, and to help them move in the path that God has called them to do. But it all stems from the same gifting, which like I said, I'm missional, I'm pastoral, very much kingdom advancement minded, right? And so, like I said, identifying your passions and how you are happy with those who you serve. The second thing is your administration, and it's tied to where you are located. You can't be a pastor to a secular environment like a chaplain has to be. It's different. It's different. A lot of people don't even know what a chaplain is. For knowledge, for anyone who doesn't know, I'm also a police chaplain besides being a pastor or being, ordained minister. And it's a different ball game. You can't go into the police department and preach and correct and do all the things the same way that you can do in the church with people who respect you already. You have to go into that field and earn the respect. So, wherever God has put you, the gift still could come out, but it's going to come out according to administration in that area is going to be different based on the environment. And so if you're a teacher, if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, if you're a police officer, if you're a military personnel, firefighter, whatever. There's different administrations that if you're pastoral, it's going to come out differently, but it's going to still come out in the same. You're going to still be counseling. You're going to still be consoling others. You're going to be still giving guidance and instruction. And, even if it's in a missionary capacity, like a chaplain who has to go into an environment that may be hostile towards Christianity, but there is some open doors that open up as you begin to serve and continue to serve others and show people that you actually care for them, versus like how people just come to a church and know what to expect already, right? It's not the same in the chaplain world, unless in some cases you might be in a hospital or military, but it's still going to be some differences from a church building, right? And so, and this is not just pastoral. This could be any of the ministry gifts, any of the spiritual gifts. Just giving you an example. And like I said, if you got any specific requests, you could just type it in the chat, and I'll go right there and I'll deal with that topic or that work field and kind of give some examples of how that can, how different gifts can function in these specific areas. But your specific administration is going to be different from somebody else, even if you got the same title, same calling, same gifting by title, right? But you're going to have different spiritual gifts, as I addressed about the Old Testament and the New Testament people who were called the same thing, but they all had different functions, identifying the different prophets throughout the Old Testament and those who are identified in the New Testament, that their functions were different to a different people, a different style, and they had different supportive gifts, right? Whether it was faith, miracles, healings, or if it was just word of knowledge, word of wisdom, discernment of spirits, or if it was really heavy in the prophetic dimension, primarily, you just see a lot of the heavy prophetic, but you still see the word of knowledge, word of wisdom, discernment of spirits when you deal with the prophetic. But, it's going to come out differently. And, whatever you're called, your administration is going to be suitable to that environment. And it's like I said, this is not church talk. This is kingdom talk. Kingdom talk goes beyond the walls of the church. The local church is a place where you can identify your gifts, function in your gifts, develop them, and then even go into the world and really, if God called you to those different veins, then you can administer those gifts with the schooling that you have had at the local base, the local church, right? Which is supposed to be the training ground for every Christian believer. But I can tell you from personal experience of doing a lot of cross-cultural missionary work, as well as, with, like I said, a lot of people would deem apostolic, where I'm helping churches, coaching churches, empowering churches, planting churches, evangelizing, reaching others, starting new communities of believers in different places, not just in the church building, but out just period, out in the open, and just growing, letting God grow it. I could tell you from that experience of over 30 years of dealing with church and church life, that a lot of people are not getting trained in the church, the base. So the body of Christ comes in to fill the gap a lot of times. Faith is a good example of that, but also like denominations and, association of churches and different things like that, where, there's this group of others who this one may not have the ability here at this church, but there's another, they have ability. And a lot of times they send people to seminaries and Bible college, which I've done that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But again, the local church is the best place to get the grooming for practical ministry. But it doesn't stay there. Jesus' ministry was to the marketplace primarily. And about, I would say, 90% of congregants are not on staff at a church, right? They have actual jobs that they go to, that they actually fund the working of the local church, as well as the body. If they're part of a denomination, there may be money that circulates through the denomination to help other churches, or even towards the headquarters, who disseminates the money to be able to help other churches and different things like that. But irregardless, we still have, like I said, 90% are still in the marketplace. And so they have the giftings and callings that may not be just for the local walls of the church, but they are in their environments, and they are Christian and they love God, but they need grooming and cultivating and discipling for how this functions in their context of where they are. And so identifying the gifts is the first thing, right? We got to know what God has called us to do, and then our administration can be wherever that vein is. You know, that we are dynamic administrators, that people know we're Christian, and they are exposed to the kingdom and presence and power of God when we are administrating. Yes, because God is, again, not limited to the walls, and this goes to all the gifts: mercy, faith, right, healing, miracles, deliverance, which also translates not just spiritual things, but it's mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, right, financial. These could be counselors. These could be social workers who actually work with people in the mental capacity, really working on that mind, because the Bible even says to renew your mind, right? And you have to have the mind of Christ. So how are you going to have the mind of Christ when you got all this other stuff that's unsettled in your mind? And it may be due to trauma or whatever that you have experienced or have been invested in you without your request or permission. You were just born that way, right? We need to be able to deal with the mind. Just work. It just have to. So those kind of people, really, even psychologists who are Christian, social workers who are Christian, counselors who are Christian, who follow the biblical principles of God and the Word. These people can be very beneficial pastorally, and even evangelistically in reaching people who are not coming and will not ever come by choice to the four walls of the church. And this is kingdom work. This is God moving in these environments. And so this can, wherever your administration is going to function. Your gifting is going to function according to that. And then the last thing is identifying the people that we're called to. And so we're all called to different people. I've been able to be blessed. I'm obviously African American by nationality, but I've been learning Mandarin Chinese for about four and a half years now. And from day one, I was picking it up and pronouncing like a native, right? And it's like it's a gift, because I started in my 40s. I'm 48 now. I started at 44. That's a no-no, right? You do it when you're younger, because you can grasp that. And Chinese language is one of the hardest languages in the world. The Mandarin or even Cantonese, which are the two most popular, right? There's other dialects, but those are the two most popular that's spoken widely. And yeah, it's like just natural. And so with that, I've been able to meet other people of other nationalities, right, to be able to speak other languages. But I've also met people and have trained people who are Macedonian, Serbian, which are similar, Russian in language, kind of similar, but definitely some differences. Ukrainian, these are Europeans, right? Korean, Japanese, Filipino, Spanish, Brazilian, yeah. And there's a couple more that God has blessed me to be in close proximity with people and even pick up some of their language just like a native, just like that, right? And so that's a gifting, which, some will probably protest, but, it sounds like the gift of tongues, to be able to pick up languages that you have not really learned, but you're able to adapt to it, and you're picking up what they're saying and understand what they're saying, even though they haven't told you yet in some cases, right? So we see the example of in Book of Acts chapter 2, where they was actually speaking not the heavenly language, they were actually speaking a language of earthly people who they were not of that nationality, and they just had it, and they were praising God in that language. But either way, there's a variety of gifts in the Bible, right? You could just go read through them in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, as far as the spiritual gifts. That's one of the biggest lists of identifying all the different gifts. There are more places, as I've addressed, in Ephesians 4 and in Romans as well. But so we have to know who we're called to. And that's why I'm cross-cultural. I understand that because I can meet and reach people in their different communities and cultures by adapting to them very rapidly, even though I'm African American by nationality and shouldn't even be doing any of that, because God saved me from the street gangs, right? So I had nothing to do with that kind of stuff back in the day. So but either way, The people that you're called to, it might be school kids. You know, you have to know the age groups that you're most comfortable with, that you're most passionate with. It might be people with psychological issues. It might be people who are hurting, who've been through a lot of relational hurts and breakdowns. It might be congregations. You know, it might be people, the sheep, you know, the flock in the local congregation or the church, right? It could be anything. It could be the people you serve. If you are, there's a term for this. They use it. They say garbage man, but there's actually a term for it. Actual description, more positive. It seems like descriptive term instead of just calling like people like, "God, that's the garbage man." You know, there's a more professional term. I'll put it that way. But even in that, you know, you still meet people, you still run across people, and just that 1 second or 5 seconds or 2 minutes of interaction that, you know, God can use you to just invest in people. I'm telling you, in different fields of life, you could be, if God put you there, you'll be exposed to so many different people's life, their passions, their aspirations, their failures, their concerns, their worries, their struggles, their challenges, or their questions, right? And this can happen anywhere. And so you have to know the people that you're assigned to and identify how you're made, because then in that case, you could be most effective in ministry, right? Wherever that environment and context is. So, yeah, it's very important that we know these three things, that we identify our gifting and calling, that we know our administration, and that we identify the people who we're called to, who we're actually attracted to not physically, but who we're attracted to minister to help them to know God. And like I said, it all starts with the call, like we saw from Samuel, for those who may be coming in later, from 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 10 through 14, we saw that it starts with the call from God. It has to be Him, and it has to be Him that takes us through this process with people in our lives, with our church community, with other believers, wherever, and opportunities that we are presented with to be able to develop more and more in those gifts and callings, right? Because we all got to start somewhere. And you know, my start was over 30 years ago, but you never stop learning, because you're spending time with the creator of the universe. You're in partnership with God. So there's always something fresh and new. Even from things that you knew about, you can learn something new from that, because you're with the Holy Spirit, who is an ever revealing spirit, who is a spirit of revelation and knowledge and insight. He never runs out of it. So, you know, he's always got some goodies to keep you on your toes and entertained, if you will, because we need to keep our mind on the things of God and to be attracted to the things of God. Because as time goes on, and we see this in the Bible with a lot of people in ministry, as time goes on, it becomes normalized, and we start to forget God. And we could become even like this Eli, who knew about the sins of his sons but wouldn't deal with the problem, right? We just know it's not right, but we end up going in a path, which I've seen this so many times, over and over. Leaders who've been in ministry for years, right? And they get complacent. We start just, you know, drifting away from our divine, empowered, you know, stick-to-ness in Christ. And it becomes normal, and we start to get numb to it, and, you know, just start drifting. And this is normal, but this is why the Holy Spirit is given to us, to refresh and revive us, and to rejuvenate us, and to get us back on track if we're willing to listen to Him, right? And so that's all, really. That's all. We really just need to know, you know, our identity, our administration, and the people who we're called to. So, as I usually always do, I close out with prayer. So if there's any prayer requests or anything, let me know. This time we didn't go on Facebook, but for those who came in late, I do have my other Faithia affiliated account it's a Facebook, and so this is being recorded there too, and broadcast live there as well. So they can kind of get in on the message, but also to kind of find out what Faithia is, more about Faithia, and how it can really benefit them in their life and ministry. Okay, so I don't see any prayer requests. No, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. So God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this time. We